Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Conceptualizing and Planning Great Enterprise Mobile Apps. Thank you very much for the great attendance. My name is Adam Bookman, and I will be the moderator for today's event. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. To ask questions, and we really encourage you to ask questions, please use the Q&A function on the WebEx screen. In addition, we'll be taking questions on Twitter using the hashtag #MobileStrategy. We'll also be posting a few interesting items on Twitter, and as always, remember to follow us at Propellix. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides that Eric Carlson is going to go through today will be made available on our website shortly after the webinar. Before I pass it over to Eric and we dive right into the topic, I want to give you a brief background on Propellix. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Propellix creates mobile strategies and world-class apps for the enterprise. We're 100% focused on mobile for the enterprise. We have a long track record of working with Fortune 500 clients, helping them strategize, plan, and implement various disruptive technologies. We're based in San Jose, California, with consultants throughout North America, and we deliver engagements globally. So just I wanted to touch on what we do as a company. We have 3 service lines. The first service line is Enterprise Mobile Strategy, and we deliver these in a series of workshops focused on both business and technology, mobile-related issues. On the business side, we help companies plan their mobile strategies, figure out how mobile fits into their overall company strategy, and one of our popular offerings is building mobile app roadmaps, figuring out what apps to build, what order to build them in, where in their companies the hottest spots to innovate are. We have a series of kickstarts to get you going with your mobile strategy on the IT side and on the business side, and you can see some of them up there. Our second line, service line is mobile advisory services, and for a lot of clients, we offer kind of ongoing advisory support, helping them, often on the sidelines, answering mobile questions, helping with mobile strategy, helping with key issues around mobile center of excellence creation, mobile app best practices, and finally, we offer mobile app design and development services. That's where today's topic fits in. We're going to talk about how to create really great enterprise mobile apps. Our speaker today is Eric Carlson. Eric is a co-founder and partner at Propellix. He is a seasoned leader with a keen eye for emerging technologies. He's well respected in both technical and business circles due to his ability to match up the right amount of technology geekiness with business understanding to craft truly unique solutions. Eric, we're really excited to have you here today talking about creating great enterprise apps. We know that this is a really hot topic. A lot of our clients and prospects are just now getting into really the app creation process. A lot of the planning has occurred. So let me pass the presenting rights over to you, and you take it away.
Great. Thanks, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Adam said, we're really happy with the turnout today. This is a great topic, and honestly, it's a very large topic, and I think we're going to scratch some of the surface in here and give us some opportunity to continue the conversation after today. But I'm going to talk a little bit around some assumptions and some market trends, what we're seeing in terms of app creation, some of the challenges that we've seen both our clients as well as other organizations that we've spoken to in terms of what challenges are they facing in building great enterprise mobile apps. We're going to provide some tips just to get going in terms of how to really start taking some great application ideas and how do I bring those to reality to get around some of the challenges we're talking about. And we'll have plenty of time at the end to talk a little bit around QA and next steps. On the sign-up form, you probably saw there was a section at the bottom around being able to ask a question. We got a few of those really good ones that I tried to weave into this deck a little bit and make sure that we touch on. If I didn't hit on those, you can always reach out to us and we can talk directly There's propellix.com/let's talk, and you can follow up and we can set up a conversation after this. So I wanted to set some assumptions and kind of ground rules in terms of where in this conversation we're talking about. As Adam said, there's a lot of different levels to be able to start speaking about when it comes to mobile strategy, both in terms of trying to identify and trying to find areas of innovation. After I have an idea, how do I take that to reality? The IT readiness portion of this conversation in terms of what infrastructure and tools do I need to be able to bring those out to my employees or my customers, partners, and things like that. But I'm making some assumptions about you, our guests, on this call today. And if you're anything like our clients and prospects, you're probably fitting into most of these buckets, meaning that you're starting to see use cases starting to come in from the business teams, meaning that away from customer-facing applications, internally employees are asking for access on either their devices, their corporate devices, my tablets, my phone, something. But people are either asking for access in some sort of way, or they're bringing really valid use cases to the table in terms of trying to find ways to move the needle, so to speak. You might already have a customer-facing app strategy. So that was the 2010, 2011 structure, is to start building outward first, get something up in the App Store, have that present. And I think organizations are struggling with that today a little bit, but you probably have a customer-facing app strategy, and now we're starting to think about more things internally. And here we're primarily talking about consumer mobile devices, meaning I'm talking about Android and iPhones and iPads and those types of things, not so much mobile, Motorola or Intermec type devices that are more embedded with Windows Mobile. I'm talking really more consumer type side. You might be working on some areas of IT readiness, and there's a small link in here to see what I'm talking about. But when we talk about IT readiness, we're talking about the components on the IT side to really enable innovation within mobile. So including security and network and application development and other types of things that are really parts of this overall structure, not just the great use cases. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And a lot of organizations we see the opportunity beyond porting. And I think the first thing out of the gate was system access in terms of trying to get into a specific item or be able to have access to SharePoint or something else. But now we're seeing business teams really understand the opportunity beyond just having access to a current application on my mobile device. And today, we're going to talk about business to employee to customer or consumer, meaning the applications that you're building for your employees to sit down with a prospect or with a customer. And there'll be some B2C items here directly as well. From a market perspective, we clearly see, and you guys, there's no surprise in here in terms of the types of applications that are being delivered in the outside marketplace, the time that is being spent on those applications, and prioritizing some of those things in terms of minutes spent over some of the mobile web type areas. And this picture isn't really quite as rosy as what this means to say. A lot of organizations are really struggling with putting out applications that are Me Too type of applications for their customers and having somewhat negative or tepid reviews. They're not seeing the type of return that they thought, and frankly, a lot of people come back to the mobile website when they really want to get information versus trying to find something on the external site. Internally, however, we're seeing a little bit of a different trend. And this is a Yankee Group report that that was just recently released at the end of 2012 and also in 2011 about where applications are being built behind the firewall. And for us, we really saw 2012 as being the year for planning and really budgeting for mobile. We saw a lot of organizations that really wanted to be able to understand, to be able to identify where we could take advantage of some mobile type of opportunities, but it just wasn't in the budget. We just didn't have, we could do small assessments, but there wasn't really a line item for a lot of mobile type of use. 2013 and going into 2013 and into last year, we're really seeing as the year of action. And we're seeing a lot of IT-related projects really transition from more B2C to more B2E type of engagements. And these drivers, and the reason this is happening, are far beyond, just, hey, it's a BYOD, we hear about this kind of BYOD situation, and that's really the driver, or we want to be able to look after laptop replacements with tablets, and there's a cost savings there. And honestly, in the grand scheme of things, in a successful mobile strategy, those two line items are probably the lowest amounts of cost savings or top-line revenue growth based on some of these use cases that we're talking about. But I think most organizations are starting to realize how mobile can really affect not a mobile strategy, but their overall core metrics. And this development that you're seeing here that's occurring in terms of these jumps in percentages around access to intranet or internal facing type of things, or getting access to a CRM application, or doing some kind of workflow management type work coming out of SAP or something else. These are nice small use cases that are really extensions of current type of processes, and there's real benefit in terms of being able to shorten cycle times and those types of things. But we think there's some work behind this as well. And so we've shown this law of three slide, I think, on a few different webinars, and it's something that we've actually developed a few years ago that has been continues to hold true. We're going to have to extend it up to the right after another year, I think. But for us, there was really just kind of three levels of value when it came to mobile. The last few years, so much really 2010 and maybe 2011, once the iPad was released and other types of things in 2010, we really saw this kind of value gap. And we had this structure where people were bringing devices in, but it was primarily email and calendar. What do they have access to via ActiveSync or something else? A lot of consumer app usage, and CIOs were just say, keep these things off our network and whatever. And there was this huge value gap that we saw in terms of what we thought the anticipated value was versus what was actually occurring in terms of using consumer-based apps and having very limited access. Around last year, we really saw CIOs turn from being concerned around mobile to really embracing it. And we've clearly seen that in terms of some of the applications you saw on the previous slide, in terms of the porting of applications, extending of ERP and CRM type processes, more general and direct business applications that are being built for the enterprise. And now we're starting to see some real value kind of come in where this is. And I think somewhere we're probably in this area, somewhere going up this ramp. For the organizations that we're talking to and some of our customers, there's value in there. But there's something way beyond that. And moving up to this upper right area, where we're not just taking current applications and porting and having, that the access is really the driver, but there's some areas of new use cases, a way to be able to really look at how we change the way we interact with customers or our employees, change the way we work and the type of items that we're doing, and really move mobile not as an extension of some enterprise system, but as an enterprise system itself that drives value. And so a lot of our customers are trying to move up that structure, and honestly, it's not very easy to do that in terms of where we think some of these really valuable areas are. Number one, you guys, based on the folks that are on this call, work at very large organizations that have a lot of disparate data sources and complex processes. It's not very easy just to pick out some small little piece and try to deliver it on mobile when the other 35 processes that attaches to are not mobile enabled and it's on 20 different systems and other types of things. And so this idea of around disparity creates roadblocks, and sometimes it's been difficult to be able to identify how to build a unique path or be able to change the way that we approach some of these challenges with mobile. Another area has been a lack of UX knowledge or user experience knowledge. We've seen organizations struggle because, frankly, they've never done it before. I mean, we've had a lot of UX teams that being part of external-facing, customer-facing type of things for the public website or the MDOT site, or being able to look at our external applications outside. But when it comes to looking at applications that we use for our employees, typically that UX part is whatever the vendor has from their base software. So SharePoint sites kind of look like SharePoint, and there's some nice graphics on top of it, but is it really looking at how we want to be able to interact with our employees and how they interact with that data? Another area we come and see challenge is mobile doesn't really fit traditional IT funding. And away from having a budget for IT readiness and some of the things when it comes to identifying some of the challenges and solutions to be able to build and support mobile applications, when it comes to the business aspect of things, of trying to find areas for innovation and building mobile apps, a lot of times the benefits seem quite small. The costs are really unknown, and it might be one application or one piece of a workflow that goes onto a mobile device, but really doesn't chip away at anything. IT organizations, frankly, are typically used to budgeting and trying to fund IT projects of $250,000 or above. We're talking about mobile applications that we're trying to deliver for under $40,000. And the cost associated with that, the time, and some of the other types of things, sometimes it just doesn't line up well. And it gets kind of frustrating to try to have mobile projects go through a traditional IT funding and prioritization process where they constantly get pushed off. And part of that lack of funding also really creates a lack of culture for innovation. And a lot of times it's very easy to try to obviously build around improving best practices and improving process and other types of things. But when you have the opportunity to really throw away process or throw away things that have been done for a very long time based on other applications or paper-based processes or other types of things, it's very difficult to find the time for this. And we constantly run into mobile application ideas that on their own have a nice benefit to them, and we can deliver them in a small amount of time. But if the business wants to take time and say, you know, let's spend a few weeks here and really think about how we can change this process and even get rid of these types of systems to be able to do some of this work, they just can't be able to find a way to be able to fund that and be able to build that time into their projects. And so that culture around innovation and constantly being able to question what we're doing and why we're doing it has been a kind of ongoing concern. And so how do you start to begin to build great enterprise mobile apps? And so we wanted to provide 3 tips to get around some of these types of concerns. And I'm hoping that the last 4 I mentioned were pretty similar to what you guys have dealt with in the past, or hopefully gotten past some of these in the past as well. But I want to talk about 5 different ways to be able to move forward. The first tip is understand that there's no gold standard. So like we've talked a lot before on other webinars and other types of information that we put out, this is very early in what we call the bottom of the first inning in terms of mobile maturity and use. And understand that what you think are best practices will not be best practices in 3 years from now. What you're seeing in terms of maybe what your competition is doing externally or internally may not be the best thing for your users or your employees. And so there's a great opportunity in here. And one of I think the first pieces and the first areas that we want to be able to invoke is to try to ensure that you're okay to fail in some of these types of areas. You know, enterprise applications, not enterprise mobile applications, but core enterprise apps really drive best practices. And there's similar usage, I think, across many organizations in terms of how they would configure SAP or Oracle Financials, or how they use Salesforce, or the types of reports that they're developing out of BobJ or Cognos or something else like that. There's a competitive analysis as a data point, meaning that you can see what your competition is doing, but not necessarily is that line up exactly with what you guys might need internally. There's another factor that kind of fits in this as well, is mobile devices are providing a lot more information and able to take advantage of that information far more than other types of applications. Meaning that on a desktop application, when you're building something for an enterprise, you're primarily building that structure for who is using it. Based on their login, they have access to specific system access or specific type of data elements, and that's it. On the mobile side, you're really talking about not only who is using that system, but where that device might be, what types of activities are they trying to be able to do, when is that happening, and really trying to provoke and understand why that user is going into the application. You can take advantage of some of the other environmental type of things to build smarter apps. And we also think there's another kind of point in here that's kind of mixing in the storm is around this inflection point within organizations. And we really see organizations taking a strong step in trying to simplify some of their enterprise processes and what they're trying to be able to do. And so when you add all these up, you had this great opportunity to innovate and this great opportunity to be able to try and get rid of old processes and other types of things that can sometimes get in the way of trying to build great mobile applications. And so even though other similar enterprise applications might drive best practice and similar usage, that's at the application level, how you use that data in a mobile application combined with some of the other points might actually generate a much more valuable application than any one of those parts. And so as a tip, in terms of starting to think about these types of things and thinking about kind of building that mobile gold standard and working forward, we try to define our applications through a single enterprise metric. And a lot of times mobile applications have great opportunity in terms of looking at top-line revenue growth or trying to be able to control costs. There's a speed aspect of this thing, or maybe an employee or customer experience type of thing. And applications can sometimes get muddled because they're building functionality trying to identify and be able to impact multiple of these metrics at the same time. For us, when it comes to trying to ensure that we have the right functionality in the application and building something that is very actionable and can be quantified in some way. We usually start with time as a metric and trying to find ways and using our application to reduce the time it takes for some activity to occur, whether that be paper-based activity, or that be some sort of process type of structure, but trying to be able to find any way that we can reduce time. I'm going to show you a good example of that. Very important to define your end user. And like I said before, not define it from an actor perspective, but that's important, but looking at those 5 Ws. Where are they going to use this app? What is the environment that they're going to use that app in? When is that going to happen? What other types of information can we glean on some of those Ws to make this a far more effective application versus just building access into some sort of system that's on the back end and et cetera. All that's just doing is just building access to a process that might not work for where they are at that moment. They're just giving them access to do their actual work. I think some of these applications that we're starting to build and where our clients are trying to take us as well, we're really seeing them being able to use the data and the assets within the application to shorten that process. And the biggest one for us is augment the environment, being that depending on where that user is and the actions that are being taken, build applications that help them close those transactions or help them move that ball forward. So as an example of that, one of our clients has a mortgage and lending business, which is a very large source of their revenue. And they're having some challenges in terms of trying to identify leads, be able to control contacts, going through a process of qualification. And it was very much of a paper-based / system-based type of process to be able to go through that initiation process, and it required a lot of different back and forth between the customer and the client. And so our overall goal, we thought clearly there was ways that we could increase revenue in this. We thought there was cost containment, a bunch of things. But our big thing was trying to single-handedly reduce the cycle time for approvals. That was our overall goal for this application and the goal for their mobile strategy initially. And so based on those inconsistent processes, it also drove a lot of errors. Customers were confused because they were getting paperwork and it would come back for signature and come back to them for changes and other types of things. And it actually created responsibilities on the customer side that we were pushing them information and they wouldn't take access on it, they wouldn't take action on it. So this group had a challenge in terms of closing those types of things because the customer was controlling the timeline a little bit. And so there was so much functionality that was identified for, think of it as a sales canvas type of application, that it was difficult to understand where to start. It was too complicated in terms of the back end and in terms of finding the right data to be able to access some of these types of structures. And it was just too big. It was just getting too large, where the structure came up where the costs were getting so high, it just got to be a little bit too large and too much risk associated to it. So we built an app plan that really outlined the process and looking at being able to capture data on the spot, do some document gathering, and reducing that overall cycle time. And it's been a great success in terms of being able to move that process forward and less confusion on the customer side. And we haven't looked at revenue or cost containment, any type of stuff. Our big thing was getting that cycle time down, in which case it's doing wonderfully in that, and it'll drive those other metrics as well. The second tip I want to talk a little bit around is building to the 80%. And similar to a little bit of what I just mentioned, a lot of our customer-facing applications and internal processes, meaning that applications that we're building in-house to be able to support what we're doing with customers, either in CRM or on the ERP side or something else. Typically, about 80% of those customer needs are handled in about 20% of that functionality. So I have this beautiful SAP screen here. This UX is delivered to be able to handle any single possible customer solution that can come up and requirement. And it's the reason that there's 17 tabs and the way it's structured is to be able to handle anything that has to come at it. Mobile is not that. We don't have to follow those rules. And I think a lot of organizations have challenges in terms of trying to make sure that we can solve every challenge that comes up in a specific user group or in a specific situation. And it's okay to be able to have those bounce out. And so we're very much around beginning to build that app concept around maybe 1 or 2 scenarios. Solve one problem really well, and the most common problem, and then start iterating beyond that to say what are the types of things we think are coming up. And with this, you get this opportunity to be able to really simplify or even remove a lot of commonly performed tasks, since we're able to take advantage of some of those 5 Ws, and also the ones that are non-value add in there, we can find ways to be able to bypass those in a lot of areas within mobile applications. And it's very difficult to be able to start thinking about this, but I think the key point here is to really start thinking around what types of processes do we typically follow through on, and what is that percentage that are very much repeatable, and try to go after those. As an example of that, we built a small application that was just used as really a cross lookup tool. At this client, the business teams took a very great approach to it. They were looking for a simple task to be able to remove. And so they followed different types of actors around, and they were looking for ways to be able to use mobile to get around some complicated and unnecessary tasks that were occurring within the business. And so this task was a significant amount of time that was being used on different systems in different areas to do cross lookups on PCs. And it was really a very complicated, not very complicated type of process, but it just took time because they were going away from their workstation back to a PC to be able to bring up a few different systems, get some information, come back, et cetera. And so, we built a small application in 2 weeks that based on their numbers, gives back about 3 hours per week of time per user, just based on time that was spent doing these lookups or trying to find, going to the right information, being able to write things down, bring those back, et cetera, et cetera. And, in the enterprise side, when we were doing the application development on the enterprise side, we would kill for an application of a high dollar amount that might give back 1 or 2 or maybe 5% of productivity time. This, you're talking about 8 to 10% a week based on an application that was developed in 2 weeks. And so these opportunities are everywhere. And we think that simple types of things here, where you're not getting too complicated in terms of app scope and generation, starting with something that is very simple, that success is starting to drive future scope and not some perception of where time is spent or some perception of value. And sometimes for us, it's very important to get out in front of the users and really look at what they're doing every day to understand where we think some mobile use cases could be overlooked and very valuable. The third one is really around using visualization. And visualization, we talked a little bit before around not having UX experience in-house and other types of things. Visualization is absolutely the largest one that we use in terms of trying to build great enterprise applications. We use it to invoke change. We use it to find ways to start respecting end users, whether that's be B2E or even B2C, their time and the tasks that they're trying to perform. We use it to try to force scope decisions in terms of how we're going to make decisions on what we're going to put in the application and not. It's a great way to question what is viewed as commonplace functionality. And so a lot of times we get stuck into processes and things like that based on either what we've always done or based on systems that drive some of this information. And that visualization used is a great way of being able to really question on what we're trying to do here. And frankly, it's also a great way to fail cheaply. Building very high interactivity applications in a prototyping type of fashion and being able to push those out to end users does not cost very much, and it gets a lot of feedback very quickly in terms of if you're headed the right way, if you're not headed the right way, and being able to take that forward in some sort of way. The question was asked coming into this thing around visualization tools, and this is such a common type of area within mobile. There's a lot out there, and there are even more that's growing, but there's basic ones like people still use paper, and you can buy some nice types of templates from a company called UI Stencil that look exactly like the device screens, and you can have a nice little stencil to it, and you can apply it to it and use that as a way to be able to innovate around that, which we've done. Keynote on OS X, there's a group called Keynotopia that produces PowerPoint as well as Keynote-based items that you can drag into PowerPoints, push those over to the devices, and be able to run a full-screen presentation that looks pretty good, and actually it can act, at least from a screen perspective, act like the application should look. Some quick semi-working stuff clearly within the application development tools themselves, like Xcode Storyboard, or even in some of the cross-configuration tools, like AppCelerator has a nice little prototyping tool. But we start really getting more into some of the cloud-based ones. Proto.io is really our favorite from a from a prototyping perspective, a lot of reusable components, ability to put those out, be able to share and annotate types of things with clients, be able to bring those back. Fluid UI is another great one. And even all the enterprise tools like iRise, you guys are familiar with that. iRise does prototyping and storyboard and workflow type management work for enterprise tools, and now working back inwards into mobile. And there's many more as well, but they're out there. They're not extremely expensive. Well, some of those aren't extremely expensive, and a great way to be able to start pushing back on the business. And one of the areas that is another one of those examples, one of our clients has a customer-facing, not consumer, but customer-facing application that we're scheduled to roll out in the next few months. It's an application that's used to do reservations, basically. And there's a website version of that is a 21-step process to be able to make this reservation. And every time, meaning if I come back in today and make a reservation, I come back in tomorrow, it's the same 21-step process, which seems silly, right? I mean, who would build a 21-step reservation process? But you look into them, and they're all really required. I mean, there's all these customer requests have to be handled. They're handling different types of requests, both in terms of severity, in terms of location, other types of things. There's actually a lot of data that needs to be captured here to be able to handle this well. And so the application, the first round of that, turned into a 21-step mobile application. And very quickly through prototyping, everybody was really turned off and said, this is not going to work. We should just build, give access to the mobile site, and I don't know what we're doing here. And then we started going back and really understanding the metrics associated to who are these customers, and let's start looking at their customer profile. And we started getting into that data, and you started realizing there's a lot of pathing that was going through this 21 steps that was extremely similar. And based on that, we had to make the decision to not serve every customer and cut out some of those paths. So that 21-step process turned into a 3-step process by cutting out about, whatever, it was 14 or 18% of customers who could possibly use the app. And that's very painful for organizations to be able to talk about in terms of taking a set of customers and just cutting them off from a piece of an application like this. This is just for round one. Maybe in the future we find a better way of being able to use that. But visualization was really the weapon that we could use to come back and really understand what's important here. And for the 86% folks who come in and do a similar type of process, we took a 10-minute process and turned it into a 30-second process. And that benefit, I think, will show up far more than the 14% of folks who would actually still need to use the website for that. The fourth tip is building around readiness. And, on the enterprise side, and even sometimes on the mobile side, you never get a straight road that's all green lights and we can see the end zone from here and let's go, go, go. That never happens. Enterprise IT engagements, there's a lot of areas around readiness, both in terms of data and cultural fit and process readiness and IT system readiness and all these different types of things. On the mobile side, you still have those same concerns, and being able to make sure that we're building applications that are actionable, that are going to a series of end users that will be able to take advantage of it, that we can clearly see where there's process improvement, other types of things. It can sometimes be a challenge. And so the good news on the mobile side is typically the requirements are a little bit smaller from the readiness perspective. The types of data that we need for some of these types of workflows and the breadth of that data is hopefully more confined. And we're trying to be able to build around readiness for a cultural fit that we know is there. And so sometimes organizations get wrapped up in trying to solve 20 levels of data readiness or some sort of process change or some organizational fit type of things before moving forward. And it'll never happen. And so our tip around this is to be able to identify the pieces of functionality, identify the areas of data that are ready, prioritize those in, and then come back and be able to continue to add functionality based on the usage of that application and move forward. However, the IT readiness component of this cannot be overlooked. And so when we start talking about the development of the application, some of the reusable components, start looking at some of the infrastructure requirements and other types of things, these are not to be taken lightly. Security is always imperative in terms of how we're going to secure this data, assuming it's internal-based applications. If I'm pushing an application out to end users, I want to make sure I can support that both from a process and business perspective, as well as maybe from a device or application level side, from an IT side. And so having those support processes in place and making sure that we have an understood security profile for those types of needs and understand what types of web services are we generating and where is those going to be stored and how are applications going to come in and touch those services, et cetera, really are plumbing areas that need to be done. And so this is also an area where we've seen challenges in the past where business team kind of moves forward in something. They might go outside of IT to be able to start delivering a piece of functionality, and they come back and say, okay, hook this up. And that is really the wrong approach that we've seen as well. And so there's that same link as before in terms of some of the IT readiness piece. There's a whole other webinar around IT readiness, but I do want to point some of these types of things out that there's really some plumbing areas that really need to be well thought out and structured before some of these applications are really built. And the last tip I have related to some of the conceptualizing and planning areas is think about, at least initially, delivering this outside of IT processes, but not outside of IT. We've seen organizations that go try both ways with this. One is they try to deliver within IT structure process. I talked before around project funding and being able to look at methodology and overall milestones and things like that. And mobile projects have reduced down to nothing based on some of the weight of these types of processes. They're very difficult to innovate within there. I need to be able to know what I'm going to do before I do it. And sometimes in these mobile applications, you want to be able to have a little bit more of a game time decision based on some of the data needs and where we think the functionality is going to be useful and based on end user feedback and things like that. So IT clearly has to be a participant or leader in this process, and I think working outside of IT is never a great option for any type of project, especially within mobile. We try to avoid heavy waterfall, milestone requirements, maybe some PMO oversight, look at the funding and infrastructure needs in terms of, we're waiting 6 months to bring up a test server, which we've seen before. There's ways to work outside of some of those IT processes to still ensure that we're not wasting money and time, but we're not really building an enterprise-grade solution, at least out of the gate. But use that delivery as a way to start making IT processes a little bit more mobile-friendly, meaning smaller projects, more iteration, faster infrastructure needs, faster connectivity needs, things like that. And sometimes external developers might be required because they don't have the skill sets in-house, which is definitely understandable based on whether that's an MEDP or a native application of some sort. But if you can, really try to involve the internal user experience team, whether that is somebody who is within the business or in marketing or somewhere else. Architecture and enterprise architecture has to be at the table, and also data services is such obviously a strong integration point. And we try to always build and release for under 50,000 in under 4 weeks, meaning that if you're looking at scope in terms of release structure that is 2 or 3 times that or 4 times that, you might want to step back and say, is there too much risk associated with this? Should we think about breaking this down a little bit, doing a little bit more iterations? And even small functionality items, you'll notice, unlike on the customer side where you can deliver everything to the App Store and people will still poo-poo it, internally, you can deliver very small pieces of a valuable piece and users will just be asking for more. And when is that going to come? And this is great and blah, blah, blah. And so don't be afraid of being able to deliver small amounts of functionality that you wouldn't possibly do maybe on a website or somewhere else and say, this is the first release, we're working towards it, we're trying to find areas of high amounts of readiness, give us your feedback, and et cetera. And I guarantee you'll get great feedback and really good participation from the end user teams. So those are the 5. So understand there's no gold standard. Making sure that we're looking at and trying to always bring innovation within there. Start with time as a metric is a great one for us to be able to think about that a little bit. Build around the 5 Ws we talked about before. Build for the 80%. Cut complex process, and there's ways to be able to do that, but try to be able to identify things that are very reusable or repeatable from a process perspective, focus on those. Use visualization as a weapon, whether that is a paper-based or a Keynote-based or a high quality cloud-based prototyping tool. That is the single largest tool that we use to try to identify and build great reusable applications. Build for readiness. Again, don't worry about things not being 100% lined up. Try to build small areas of applications and iterate on top of those based on data readiness and process and usage and things like that. And initially, just deliver outside of IT core processes, which might be a little bit difficult to do depending on the organization you guys are working in. But we've seen that when we're able to keep the cost down and be able to build something in kind of almost like a an incubator type of mode, we've had great success in there in terms of building something that is useful and is inexpensive and shows great value going forward. The last thing I wanted to be able to talk about is aligns pretty well to a workshop that we deliver for our clients. You saw a couple of the examples that I mentioned within this presentation. We have a mobile app scoping and planning workshop that we do. It's typically 2 weeks long and goes really from a lot of the areas we talked about in terms of envisioning some of the scenarios, getting to some of the requirements, identifying some of the market opportunities, these types of things. Sometimes we bring competitive analysis information into that, heavy amount of prototyping and building that app roadmap out. So really understanding what types of functionality we think we can build in this first release and how do we move that forward over time, taking a lot of that feedback into account, and really building a development approach. So what would that cost in terms of a budgeting perspective? What does that release look like? And trying to build some formalization in there. And this kind of fits it well into an IT strategy as well, around being able to understand how this fits into some of the IT needs from a security perspective, in terms of a device management perspective maybe, or from an application data access side of the house, things like that. And so it helps really take helps build a little formality around how we're going to bring this application idea forward, but still trying to have a lot of innovation components in there in terms of visualization, some of the market opportunity pieces of that, as well as trying to make sure that it's built on a solid technical approach as well. So Adam, I know you wanted to talk a little bit around our Kickstarts and other types of things. I'll let you have a few minutes to do that.
Great, yeah, and before I do that, I just want to open up the floor to questions. So if you could, if you have a question, type it in using the Q&A function on the WebEx screen. We already have a couple good questions for Eric, but I wanted to give you some time to get your question in. But to follow up on Eric's discussion and just the process that we walked through, wanted to make everyone aware of the Kickstarts that we have. Propellix is really focused on getting our clients going quickly with mobile. And this Kickstart on the topic that we covered today around mobile app scoping and planning is a great Kickstart. It takes about 2 weeks. It helps you really get a handle on the scope of the app. It includes the visualization, the prototyping process, as well as a detailed plan on the technical side, as well as a project plan to implement the app. It's a really great process, and what we're offering is 20 hours of mobile advisory services as a special offer to those of you on the webinar with the purchase of any one of our Kickstarts. And you can check out our Kickstarts at propellix.com. And if you have any questions on them, info@propellix.com is a great way to contact us, and our phone number is up there. I think we'll get going with a few questions. There's a little bit of time left here, Eric. The first question came in during the sign-up process for the webinar, and you touched on it. It's from Gisela, and she asks about simplifying complex enterprise processes, and you spoke a little bit about it in the webinar. Can you just talk a little bit more about how to go about simplifying complex enterprise processes?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, like I mentioned before, we try to use visualization as a way to lay out a set of wireframes for how we think a process might work, and see if we can take all the different differences in those processes through that wireframe. It's always a difficult question to answer because there's a lot of different ways of being able to do that. The first way that we would be able to do that is try to ensure there's some documentation of that and understand where there's points in that process flow that are tied either to system needs or to workflow or to some sort of approval, in ways that typically, those types of processes are waiting for an approval, or they're waiting for some sort of piece of data to be able to move forward. And mobile is all about being in the moment. So we're trying to find ways to be able to take some of those approvals and those workflow items and bring them to mobile devices to shorten that life cycle time versus having an email link that's created and coming back and all these different types of things. So the first way that we try to be able to look at in reducing that complexity is really look at the flow and what we're trying to achieve, understand the types of variances that come through that flow, and really work towards that 80%. And so visualization, like I said, is a tool that we use to do that. Some process analysis is commonly tools that we're able to do that. And for the most part, I mean, the real challenge in that is not so much identifying where to cut complex process, it's getting agreement that the processes that we're leaving out are okay to leave out. And so from that perspective, usually we try to use metrics, or we try to use some data, some hard data around that to say, really, how many times is this occurring, and what is the need for this? And sometimes we've even broken that out into 2 separate applications we've had to in one instance, and other types of ways to be able to take advantage of, or to be able to do that. But at the end of the result is really trying to ensure that we're not building a solution that works for everybody, and trying to make sure that we're focusing on the ones that are most common within that.
Sure, that goes back to the build for the 80%. Next question from Anna. This is a good question, and I know our clients struggle with this. What's the best way to get agreement on the first release app functionality in a large company with lots of politics, where everybody wants their piece of functionality in the app?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sometimes, and it's kind of a mix of benefit versus cost associated with creating the application. And it can be sometimes also a mix of benefit versus risk, and the risk being not only the cost of creating the application, but also maybe sometimes the data that's contained within that application. A lot of times for the first release, of any app, we're typically trying to focus that process down to something that we know is going to be 100% value add for the users that are using it, number one. And number two, we're taking a significant part of time out of the equation. And so that scope for us, we try to define either based on the amount of time that we feel we can save the end user by going through this process on the mobile device, number one, and number two, being able to also ensure that we're trying to deliver in a time period that limits us down to, say, 4 to 6 weeks from an application development perspective, meaning that we know we're not creating too much risk from a cost side, and we're still providing some value within there. A lot of times that process is also a little bit of a give and take, meaning that we're working with the Mobile Center of Excellence around some of that usage. We're trying to make sure that this functionality fits into some future plans related to where we feel the application is going to go. We also should line up well with our application roadmap and what functionality we're expecting to be next. And when that roadmap is really defined, sometimes those delineation points are quite easy to be able to pick out in terms of what functionality we're going to bring into that first release versus future releases.
Great. And we got a couple questions that are the same. Thanks, Casey, for your question. Had the same one from Sam, and it's what does the team support structure typically look like in support of an enterprise mobile app, an app representing multiple business lines, and that's tied into the other question of what resources and titles should be involved with the mobile app planning process. So I think there's a question about the planning process and then the support structure for an enterprise mobile app going forward.
Right. Sure. From a planning process side, typically there's a business owner who has overall responsibility for that solution. So they're well aware of the metrics that we're trying to impact. They understand they understand at a pretty detailed level the processes that are occurring in the field and what we're trying to be able to go after there. There's usually some kind of an IT liaison from an IT perspective who supports that business line, who's clearly a part of that conversation. They understand the back office systems, they understand the challenges, where other future functionalities coming that might also impact those metrics. And like I said before, there's IT involvement and obviously some business analyst type involvement and things like that. So that planning piece, for us, I think from the IT perspective, we want to make sure we have a good understanding of the types of data elements and the associated risks of those data elements in terms of pushing those to mobile devices, and we have a solution for that in the IT side and some comfort around that. And from the business team perspective, for us, it is it has to be an owner that really understands some of the frustrations in the field and has a vision for how this application might impact some of those metrics. And Adam, what was the first part of that question again?
It was, what does the team look like for the support structure when you support an enterprise mobile app that represents multiple business lines?
Sure, and I think that, like anything else, it changes over time. Initially, we typically have a part of the development team and some members of the business team who are kind of singularly responsible for at least initial small applications that are being built in new enterprises or new applications that are being built for enterprises. So there's usually a first level that goes to a standard support desk, and it's quickly level 2 comes into a development team who can really sit down with the user and kind of go through some of the challenges and those types of things. Especially for initial releases where you're really trying to gather a lot of feedback and you're building some methods in the application to gather that feedback as well, but really the in-person or the over-the-phone type stuff is much better with that. As that grows, I think it typically follows a similar approach as any other enterprise application. You start building troubleshooting docs, you start building areas and knowledge base type issues, both from a business and IT perspective, and level 2 can go to the standard level 2 support desk or even connect to the development team still. I think over time, however, as more applications get built and as the functionality of those increase, there's a lot of different areas of challenges in here. It could be connectivity issues, you could have authentication issues, you could have issues that are driving back to the web services or availability of information, to the correct code on the device in terms of pushing out from an MDM perspective. So there really is a lot more areas of troubleshooting versus kind of core enterprise apps that typically start up and are over a VPN and that's it. Here we might have a couple different layers of troubleshooting to go on. So it's just important to start understanding who has ownership for each of those areas and building into a corporate standard support desk structure.
Great, thanks. The next question is from David, and we didn't really touch on this today, but I think it's a really important question, is when does the native versus web app discussion take place in this planning process that you discussed, and how do you go about making that decision?
That's a great question. So that can be either a part of this conversation, or sometimes we see that happening a little bit before this type of application strategy needs. So part of what we were talking about before in terms of IT readiness is being able to build some structures and some kind of rules of engagement for what types of data assets we're going to allow on mobile devices, and how we're going to be able to, and also what devices we want to be able to support in terms of the use of some of those applications. So for instance, applications like some of the ones I mentioned here, there's one customer-facing one. The other ones were primarily BYOD type of situations where we knew that the data wasn't terribly risky, but there was still some controls that clearly needed to be in place to make sure that, for instance, when the application closed, we were dumping the cache of any sort of data on that area. There's some security controls in there we want to be able to put on to dictate this is the type of information that can be stored in this environment, this is what cannot be. Here's the type of user experience we're looking for and some of the security needs. And those decisions really drove back whether or not this is something we felt would be appropriate as a native application, either a MADP or a multi-native application development, or something that was completely web-based. And so really before that fact, most organizations we see, and what we help organizations do as well, is start building really a decision tree structure to say, based on this type of data asset, how much risk is inherently associated to that data, how much controls do we want to be able to have over that information, and based on some of these other types of decisions and the information security side and network and security, we're making the decision that this can be a corporate only or maybe BYOD application or maybe web-based based on these types of needs. And so it really turns into a decision tree, hopefully before you're getting to this application idea.
Great. Well, Eric, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to do the webinar today, and thank all of our participants for taking time out of their busy days to attending our webinar. And just a reminder that the slides as well as the recording will be available on our website tomorrow, and for those of you who attended, I will be sending you an email with a quick link to access those. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.